The sun was merciless that afternoon, beating down on the long stretch of two-lane road that cut through dry fields outside the city. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, blurring the horizon. There was no traffic, just the buzz of cicadas and the occasional whoosh of a car far off in the distance. At the edge of the road, near the ditch where weeds clung stubbornly to life, an old man stood beside a battered bicycle. One tire sagged flat, the rubber torn by some unseen shard of metal. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans, a pale button-down shirt rolled to the elbows. His posture was relaxed, but the way he studied the wheel had a focus that didn't belong to someone lost in age. His hands were steady, methodical, but there was no way he could ride again until it was patched. The hum of an approaching engine broke the quiet. A small sedan slowed as it neared, brake lights glowing red against the sun-bleached road. The driver, a young woman in her 20s, pulled onto the gravel shoulder. The crunch of her tires startled the cicadas into silence for a moment. She rolled down the window halfway before stepping out. The heat hit her instantly, a wall of dry air. Wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist, she looked at the man. "Do you need help?" she asked, voice careful, respectful. The old man lifted his head. His eyes met hers, and for a split second she forgot the heat. They weren't the dull, tired eyes she expected. They were clear, calm, steady. He gave her a small nod and said softly, "If you don't mind." She popped her trunk, rummaged through the scattered mess, and returned with a small kit she used for her own bike. They knelt together at the roadside, the dry weeds brushing against her calves. The man guided her hands, not bossy, not fragile, just exact. She noticed how sure he was, how every movement carried purpose. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. As they worked, she felt a strange pull, an impression she couldn't explain. He looked old, yes. The lines on his face, the silver at his temples. But beneath it, there was something she couldn't quite place. His presence was heavy, like the air before a storm. She found herself glancing at him more often than at the wheel, her mind whispering questions she didn't dare ask. They had just tightened the last bolt when the sound reached them. Faint at first, like distant thunder, then growing louder. An uneven chorus of engines, low and aggressive. The vibration carried across the pavement, crawling into their bones. The girl stiffened. The man didn't move. A pack of motorcycles crested the curve in the road, sunlight flashing off chrome, leather vests gleaming dark against the sky. They weren't just passing through. They slowed as they spotted the car, and the pair crouched by the bicycle. The engines revved deliberately, exhaust sputtering like growls. Dust kicked up from the shoulder as they pulled over, circling halfway around the car. The girl, the man. She straightened instinctively, wiping her palms against her jeans. Her heart drummed louder than the engines. The men laughed among themselves, a sharp, jeering sound. Their boots crunched on gravel as they dismounted, the smell of gasoline and sweat rolling off them. The leader, broad shoulders, tattoos crawling up his neck, jerked his chin toward the bicycle. "Well, look at this," he shouted over the idling engines. "Grandpa's out here training for the Tour de France." His buddies roared with laughter, some clapping, others smacking the sides of their bikes. The old man didn't flinch. He stood, brushed his hands against his jeans, and calmly set the bike upright. His silence was unsettling. The girl felt anger crawl up her throat, but fear kept it caged. Another biker pointed at the patched tire. "Hey, maybe he needs a stroller instead. What do you think?" The laughter grew louder, harsher. The leader grinned wide, leaning closer, eyes mocking. "Hey, old man, Want us to get you a nice little basket, too? The girl couldn't take it anymore. That's enough, she snapped, her voice cracking slightly, but sharp enough to draw their attention. For a moment, their laughter faltered, then returned twice as loud. The old man didn't look at them. He didn't look at her. He simply stood, his bike steady in his hand, his face unreadable. His silence filled the space heavier than any reply. And then one biker barked out the line that made them all double over, choking on their own cruelty. "Hey, Grandpa, maybe you'd be better off in a wheelchair." Engines roared, laughter split the air, and the girl's stomach knotted. She looked at the man beside her, suddenly desperate to understand who he really was, because something in his eyes told her this moment wasn't what it seemed. Just wondering, "Where are you watching from?" "Write it down, Bello." The engines idled like beasts, coughing smoke into the heat. Gravel cracked beneath boots as the bikers fanned out in a half-circle. The air smelled of gasoline and sweat, thick enough to taste. The girl stood close to the old man, her pulse hammering. He still hadn't said a word. One of the bikers, a broad man with a chain looped around his wrist, pointed at the patched tire. "Look at this thing," he jeered. "Grandpa's rolling on training wheels." He kicked at the wheel, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make the rim ring like a cheap bell. The others howled with laughter, clapping each other on the shoulders. The old man bent, picked up the bike, and brushed dust from the frame. He didn't scowl, didn't argue. He set it upright, with the care of someone handling glass. His silence landed heavier than any reply. That irritated them. The leader, tattoos crawling up his throat, stepped in closer. "You know what your problem is, old man?" he asked, his grin sharp, his eyes sharper. "You don't belong out here." Worlds moved on. "You're just dead weight waiting to happen." The girl clenched her fists. "That's enough," she snapped. The words came out higher than she wanted, but they cut through the noise. The leader laughed. "Enough! I haven't even started." He shoved a finger into the old man's chest. Once, twice. "Say something." "Show her you've still got a pulse." The old man said nothing. His hands rested loosely at his sides. His eyes were steady, unreadable. The chain-wrist biker smirked and squatted to the ground. With a sharp smack, he slammed his palm against the patched tire. Air hissed out in a slow death rattle, the tube collapsing into rubber folds. The hiss seemed to last forever. The laughter around it was jagged, too loud, feeding on itself. The girl's stomach twisted. She took a step forward, but one of them slid into her path, blocking her with his shoulder. His grin was a warning. "Easy now," he said. "Wouldn't want you to get hurt." "Leave him alone," she fired back, her voice shaking. "Or what?" the leader asked, leaning closer. His breath smelled like cigarettes. "You gonna save him?" The old man straightened the bicycle again. His palms brushed against his jeans, leaving faint streaks of dust. He folded his hands calmly in front of him. That was all. The stillness unnerved them. They needed noise, anger, pushback. Silence was a mirror they didn't want to look into. The leader chuckled, but there was strain under it. "You're weak. You're finished. You don't matter anymore." He pushed the handlebars sharply, knocking the bike sideways into the gravel. The frame clanged, the chain clattering against the ground. "Stop it!" the girl shouted, her face flushed with fury. "Just stop!" "Make us," Chainwrist said, grinning as if the idea amused him. She spun toward the old man, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, don't let them do this." He didn't answer. He lifted the bicycle again, steady hands, calm eyes, as though the machine itself deserved dignity even in humiliation. Then he stood, saying nothing, letting the weight of silence press harder against them than shouts ever could. The laughter faltered for a beat. Not long, just enough for the air to shift. Then one of them barked louder, filling the gap, and the rest followed. The leader leaned down until his forehead was almost touching the old man's. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. "Last chance, old-timer. You speak, or we break more than your bike." The girl couldn't hold back anymore. The words burst out before she could stop them. "You don't even know who he is?" The effect was immediate. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The engines, the boots scraping, even the cicadas in the grass. Then laughter broke again, harsher, louder, desperate to erase the weight of what she'd just said. "Who is he?" one howled. "The mayor!" Another bent double, slapping his thigh. "Maybe Santa Claus in summer." But their eyes kept drifting back to the old man. Because when she'd spoken, his gaze had shifted. Not in anger, not in fear, just focus. Like a lens had clicked into place. His silence suddenly felt less like weakness and more like choice. The bikers laughed, but it rang thinner now. And the girl, trembling, realized she'd touched something they hadn't seen yet. That the quiet man standing in the sun wasn't just an old man with a bicycle. Something else lived behind those steady eyes. The heat pressed down like a hand, flattening every sound except the slow thrum of motorcycle engines. Dust hung in the sunlight, drifting through the half-circle of leather and chrome. The girl stood stiff beside the old man, her heart hammering so loud she thought they'd hear it. The bikers had gotten the show they wanted, his silence, her protests. But the mood had shifted. Their laughter felt forced now, jagged around the edges. Chain Wrist broke the silence first. He stepped toward her, his grin stretched thin. "Relax," he said, his palm hovering just above her arm. "We're just having fun." His fingers twitched, ready to close. The old man's voice stopped him. Calm, low, not loud at all. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The girl blinked. The biker froze mid-motion. Even the others faltered, as if the tone had pulled oxygen out of the air. The girl looked up at him, stunned. His words weren't a plea. They weren't bravado. They were certainty. Simple. Immovable. Chain Wrist forced a chuckle. "Hear that?" Grandpa's giving orders. But he didn't move closer. His grin looked borrowed now. The leader stepped forward, needing to take back control. His boots crunched gravel as he squared his shoulders, leaning into the old man's space. "You think you scare us?" His hand shot out, open, aiming for the chest. Not a punch, but the kind of shove that's meant to strip dignity. He never landed it. The old man turned his wrist with surgical precision, caught the palm at its base, and redirected the motion an inch off target. His other hand slid to the wrist, thumb digging into the hollow where tendons stretch. His feet pivoted on the gravel with the smallest twist. The leader's body betrayed him instantly. Balance ripped away before his brain caught up. One heartbeat, he stood tall. The next, he was on the ground. Breath jolted out of him in a grunt. Not pain. Shock. His wrist was still in the old man's hand, pinned gently, as if by gravity itself. Then the grip loosened, and the leader's arm fell back to him like it no longer belonged to his body. The circle froze. Even the engines seemed to hiccup in their idle. The girl stared, wide-eyed, replaying what she'd seen in her head. No struggle, no wasted motion, just inevitability. He hadn't fought. He'd redirected, as if the leader had chosen the ground himself. Chain Wrist cursed under his breath and half-stepped forward. The old man lifted his gaze. Nothing else. No fists raised, no posture widened. Just a look, quiet and steady. Chain Wrist halted, as if his boots had locked into the gravel. His breath came rough, though no one had touched him. The leader scrambled to his feet, dust smeared across his shirt, fury warring with the memory of how easily he'd fallen. He jerked his wrist once, twice, testing it, as if denial could erase what had just happened. His face twisted when he found no weakness to blame but his own. The girl's voice, thin with awe, slipped out before she could stop it. You're Chuck Norris, aren't you?" The words landed harder than any strike. The bikers' heads turned sharply toward her, then back to him. One tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Another spat to the side, buying time for his pride. But in their eyes flickered something they hadn't brought with them: recognition. The old man didn't answer. He adjusted the bicycle instead, brushing grit from the chain, turning the wheel slowly to check its line. The silence was its own confirmation. The leader's jaw clenched. He wanted to spit back, to retake the moment, but his tongue found no words sharp enough. He took a step closer, but not as near as before. His hand lifted half an inch, then stalled, remembering the correction it had suffered seconds earlier. Chain Wrist muttered, eyes narrowing. "That's him. It's gotta be." His voice was meant for the others, but it only made their unease more real. "Doesn't matter," he added quickly, but it sounded weak, like a child insisting the dark was harmless. The girl shifted, emboldened now. "Leave him alone," she said firmly, voice steadier than before. She wasn't pleading anymore. She was stating terms. The old man finally lifted his eyes to the leader again. Calm, unflinching. His voice was level, almost gentle. "She's not part of this. Leave her out of it." The engines sputtered, one revving nervously before choking back into idle. Gravel popped under boots as the circle shifted. No one laughed now. The bravado that had filled the air 15 minutes earlier leaked away, replaced by something they hadn't expected to meet on this stretch of road: consequence. The leader forced a smile, though it didn't touch his eyes. "Names don't matter here," he said, voice tight. "Road's the same for everyone." His bravado felt thin, like it needed the others to nod before it could stand. No one did. The old man didn't argue. He didn't need to. He simply looked at him, and in that gaze was the quiet truth the girl had sensed from the very beginning. This was no frail stranger by the roadside. This was someone who had stood in rings where silence could weigh more than fists, who had ended fights before they began. The leader exhaled sharply, like a man trying to blow away doubt. But his eyes betrayed him. He'd seen it. They all had. And the road itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Engines coughed and fell quiet one by one, like animals realizing they weren't the apex here after all. Heat pressed down harder, baking the smell of gasoline into the dust. The leader wiped grit from his palms as if the earth had disrespected him and surged to his feet, face red where it had met the road. Pride clawed its way up his throat, faster than sense. "That was a fluke," he barked, voice cracking but loud enough to make his crew look at him instead of the old man. "Try it again, old man." He hurled himself forward, boots chewing gravel, shoulders squared for a shove that would rewrite the last 30 seconds. Two others moved with him, the pack instinct kicking in. Chain Wrist peeled left, cutting an angle toward the girl as if intimidation could be regained by proximity. Another slid to the right, eyes locked on the older man's blind side like a strike he owed himself. The circle tightened, chrome and leather closing in, the air suddenly full of elbows and intent. "Stop!" the girl cried, voice slicing the heat. But the engines, revved in nervous bursts by men who didn't want to hear her, threw a veil of sound over her words. A couple of cars slowed on the far lane, curiosity beating caution, and rolled past with windows down, faces turned. From a driveway a quarter-mile away, a man in a baseball cap raised a hand to shade his eyes and didn't move. Strangers had become an audience, and an audience had become a wait. The old man took a single step back, not retreating so much as making the space tell the truth. His hands rose, palms forward, a posture that said, "I won't start what I can't stop." The lines of his body were quiet geometry, knees soft, shoulders level, chin tucked behind the map of his knuckles. "You still don't understand," he said, voice even, carrying without effort. "It's not me against you. It's you against yourselves." The sentence hung like a shade, and for a heartbeat it cooled the scene. Then pride put a match to it. The leader roared something wordless and pounced, arms wide to swallow distance. Chain Wrist lunged in concert from the left, chain already uncoiling around his knuckles like a promise. The third man darted from the right, hungry for a blindside hit, breath hissing through his teeth. The road shifted roles. Gravel became marbles, treachery underfoot. The ditch turned into a boundary line no one saw until they crossed it. The sun made the chrome into flashes that stole peripheral vision. The girl tasted metal, fear coppering her tongue. Her hands came up without instruction, palms out, ridiculous and brave. The leader's shadow fell over the old man first. He drove a shoulder forward, leading with a forearm meant to pin. The old man's lead hand brushed the incoming wrist, turned it a thumb's width, and reduced the arm from a weapon to a lever. The leader's feet stuttered, momentum negotiating with physics. He snarled and drove harder. Chain Wrist reached for the girl, then thought better and shifted target mid-stride, deciding to collect the simpler victory. 2 hands on one quiet man. The chain clinked, bright and greedy in the sun. He looped it once around his fist and felt its weight whisper courage up his arm. The third stepped into the gap, forming on the right, hands high, fingers crooked for a grab that would pull the older man off his feet. His boots slipped half an inch on the loose stones, and he corrected, annoyed that the ground had opinions. The old man saw all of it without turning his head. It was in his shoulders, the way they stayed level, absorbing angles, allocating attention where attention wanted to break. He didn't choose a target. He chose a timing. "Stop!" the girl tried again, throat raw. This time the word reached the edge of the circle. It made Chain Wrist blink. It didn't change his arms. A pickup truck eased to a halt farther down the shoulder. A teenage boy stepped out with his phone already up, recording before his brain decided whether he should. An older couple in the passenger seat stared, the woman's hand on the man's forearm like a brake. The leader's forearm sliced in, a blade powered by humiliation. The old man's hips turned a quarter, his rear heel etching a loop in dust. The forearm slipped along the scaffold of his guard instead of finding ribs. The old man's other hand floated, palm up, under the leader's elbow, the softest of levers, asking the joint a polite question. The answer traveled down bone and stole, just enough. Chain Wrist arrived next, chain swung low to high in a short arc meant to bite. The old man's left hand, freed by the leader's elbow answering gravity, lifted and met the chain with the meaty part of his forearm, absorbing, redirecting, killing the arc without punishing the arm that carried it. The metal sang a bright, surprised note and fell against its owner's wrist. Chain Wrist grimaced more from embarrassment than hurt. The third man's fingers brushed fabric at the old man's shoulder. A tiny shift, weight onto the front foot, spine tall, turned that grip into an anchor he hadn't meant to set. The old man's shoulder rotated just enough to make the hand overcommit. The third man's balance teetered on the cliff of his own enthusiasm. Heat pooled in the ditch. Flies orbited the chrome and wouldn't land. The world zoomed in and out for the girl. Hands, wrists, thumbs, gravel. Then faces, posture. The hawk overhead making lazy circles as if everything on the ground were a diagram. The leader, angrier than he was smart, snarled, "Finish it!" as much to himself as to fate. He drove again, trying to overwhelm the small with the large. The old man stepped to his left, a half-shoe length, and the leader's path intersected the space the third had just vacated. Boots tangled. Air left bodies in grunts. The chain swung again, reflex now, not plan. The old man's voice didn't rise. "Last chance," he said. Not a threat, not a plea. A weather report. Pride chose weather's opponent. They all went at once. Around them, the audience, only minutes ago a scattering of strangers on a road, became a single held breath. The boy with the phone stopped zooming and simply watched. The older couple in the truck leaned forward as if doing so could change the outcome. A cyclist pedaled up the far lane, lifted a foot off his pedal to hover, then planted it and stayed. Dust lifted in a slow-motion halo around the four bodies about to collide. The cicadas paused, then droned again, louder, like a score. Sun flared on a mirror and died. Somewhere, a dog barked, offended by the way the day had bent. Then the bodies met, and the road, for a brief electric second, belonged to silence. Collision came not as chaos, but as timing. The leader lunged first, arms wide to smother, head down like a bull. The old man shifted half a step, caught the forearm with one hand, the wrist with the other, and let momentum fold him. A heartbeat later, the man who had sworn never to kneel was in the gravel, one knee bent under weight he hadn't chosen. Chain wrist followed fast, chain snapping upward. The old man stepped inside the arc, forearm blocking muscle, fingers rolling over his opponent's fist, until the metal spilled free. The chain hit the ground with a flat, ugly jangle. Chain wrist's face faltered, rage outpaced by disbelief. The third came from behind, fingers crooked for a choke. The old man's hand found the wrist, thumb pressing the tendon line, body pivoting through a small circle. The man's own energy laid him down on one knee, air rushing out in surprise. For a moment, the three of them hung between pride and comprehension. Dust swirled around their boots. Engines idled nervously, a soundtrack out of sync with the fight that wasn't really a fight. The leader roared, clawing for the chain. He swung with all he had, a desperate arc aimed at the old man's head. But the strike never landed. Two precise movements, one hand on the forearm, the other on the links, and the weapon peeled free again. The old man let it fall at their feet. He raised a palm and pressed it gently against the leader's chest. Not a strike. Just a line drawn. The leader staggered back, the fight spilling out of him in silence. Chain wrist threw one more wild punch, but it hit air. A light touch to the ribs stole his breath. He doubled over, coughing, balance broken. The third man, still half-crouched, tried to push forward, but froze when the old man's eyes met his. Something in them said enough. His knees obeyed. The road went still. Even cicadas paused, as if unwilling to drown out the lesson. Strangers on the shoulder stopped pretending not to watch. A boy lowered his phone, forgetting to film. The girl's throat tightened. She had thought the old man might break, or worse, be broken. Instead, she had seen control so exact It left no space for brutality. The three bikers weren't bleeding. They weren't crushed. But none of them could stand without feeling the weight of what had just happened. Their bodies weren't defeated. Their certainty was. The old man didn't taunt them, didn't raise his arms to the crowd that had started to clap in cautious bursts. He simply checked the bicycle at his side, straightened it again, and stood quiet. His breathing hadn't changed. His silence said more than victory could. Dust floated in the golden air, engines ticking as they cooled, and for the first time that day, the bikers realized the fight had never belonged to them. Engines clicked as they cooled, little metallic ticks like the road itself exhaling. Dust floated in lazy spirals, settling on boots, chrome, and the chain abandoned in the gravel. The noise of the fight drained away until only cicadas and a thin breeze filled the silence. People who had gathered at the edge of the scene, drivers, cyclists, the boy with his phone, stood frozen, not sure if they had just witnessed violence or something else entirely. The three bikers stayed low. None of them rushed to stand, though pride pushed at their shoulders. The leader shifted to his knees, then stopped, breathing heavy, but not from exhaustion. Chain Wrist pressed his palm into his ribs like he was checking whether they still belonged to him. The third looked down at his hands, shaking his head as though his fingers had betrayed him. They didn't look at each other. Humiliation prefers solitude. The old man neither gloated nor moved to finish it. He picked up the bicycle, set it carefully on its stand, and brushed dust off the frame. The small brass bell gave a single bright chime, absurd and perfect in the thick silence. His posture was calm, shoulders level, breath steady. When he finally spoke, the words carried without effort. "Get up," he said. Not an order, a permission. They obeyed, awkward, gravel crunching under slow steps. The leader finally looked at him, eyes sharp with pride and something else, something new. His mouth opened as if to spit another insult, but no words came. He stayed quiet. The old man's gaze moved over them without judgment, then to the girl still standing behind him, fists clenched at her sides. He chose his words with the precision of a craftsman. "Breaking is easy," he said. "The hard part is stopping when you could break." The sentence hung in the air heavier than any strike. Nobody clapped. Nobody laughed. It landed too cleanly to need applause. He crouched and checked the patched tire. The tube held. The wheel spun once, wobbling, then steadied. He wiped grease on a rag, as if the fight had been just another repair. The girl stepped closer, eyes wide, voice trembling with relief. "You saved me," she said. "I didn't know what they'd do." He looked at her, a smile faint and kind. "You pulled over," he answered. "You helped first." Her throat tightened. She nodded because there was no argument to make against that truth. Around them, the crowd began to dissolve. The boy lowered his phone, realizing too late he'd never pressed record. A couple in a truck drove off in silence, fingers still linked on the console. A cyclist clipped back into his pedals, head bowed as if ashamed for stopping to watch. They would all carry the story away, reshaping it in retellings, but the weight of what they'd seen was real. The bikers shifted uncomfortably. Chain Wrist bent to collect the chain, then froze halfway. Realizing what the gesture would mean, he let it lie. The third brushed grit from his jeans, avoiding every eye. The leader finally lifted his chin. The smirk that had carried him through most of his life refused to return. In its place came a nod, stiff, reluctant, but honest. Acknowledgement without surrender. The old man tilted his head toward the motorcycles lined on the shoulder. "Go on," he said. Ride careful." His tone was light, but it closed the book. The road was already done with them. Engines coughed back to life, quieter now. No revs, no howls, just machines doing their work. One by one the bikes rolled out, gravel popping beneath their tires. None of them looked back as they disappeared into heat shimmer, swallowed by the horizon. The road was empty again. The girl stood with him, the silence now carrying a strange peace. He checked the brakes, straightened the saddle, squeezed the bell once more. The tiny chime no longer felt absurd. It felt final. She broke the quiet. "I never asked your name." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. He smiled the smallest smile. "You didn't need to. It worked as a joke, as truth, as something in between." Then he swung a leg over the frame, settled into the seat, and tested the pedals with an easy push. "Where are you going?" she asked quickly, stalling the goodbye. "Same place as before," he said. He glanced toward the horizon. "There's a diner a few miles up. Coffee's not good, but it'll do." His voice had a warmth now, a release of tension. She laughed, shaky but real. "I'll drive behind you." "Just in case." "You won't need to," he replied. Then, gentler. "But you can." He raised a hand in parting, a gesture that felt like both a blessing and a closing. Then he pedaled forward, the bicycle rolling smooth despite its scars. The road welcomed him back without comment. His figure shrank into the golden distance until it became only another shadow in the long afternoon. The girl stood alone for a moment longer, committing every detail to memory: the dust, the silence, the sound of that single bell. By nightfall, she knew the story would spread. A group of bikers had picked the wrong stranger. People would argue the details, add flourishes, strip facts, but the essence would remain. They had thought they'd found an old man. That day, everyone who watched understood the truth. They had stood in front of a legend.